Well, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very first ever A4LE UK Edu Design Challenge. I'm joined tonight by Dave. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dave Strudwick. Pleasure to be here tonight. Used to be a head teacher, too long in education, going back much longer than you, Gary, and enjoying the consultancy at the moment.
Fantastic. And where are you based from this evening?
The sunny climes of Plymouth on the south coast in my dining room.
Ah, fantastic. And I too am in my dining room, so there's a bit of a theme going on there. And for those who don't know me, I'm Gary Spracklen. I'm head teacher at the Prince of Wales School in Dorchester, Dorset, England. I've been in teaching for over 10 years now. And in that time, I've been involved in several new design projects. And I've had a developing love and interest in learning space design and the use of technology in classrooms. And both these pictures, actually, Dave, were taken from our contributions to the Planning Learning Spaces book. I don't know if you want to tell everyone, what that project was all about.
Well, before I do, I just want to apologise for my COVID haircut. My ears have been lowered since that one. The Planning Learning Spaces book is absolute delight. It was a super opportunity to be a part of. And I think Terry White and Murray Hudson have done a fabulous job of providing the perfect tool for people who are investigating the development of either a new school or enhancing their learning spaces. Is the kind of thing I wish I would have had at several points on my journey through my career.
Yeah, definitely. It's a project that I'm very proud to be involved in as well, with Dave and with a few other names that Dave mentioned there. So the resource itself is a book. You can search for it on all good bookshops, and you can get yourself a copy. It's also a really extensive website available, planninglearningspaces.com, that you can find the information on. And there's a real community around the book, which I find really exciting. The other community that we're both part of is the reason why we're here this evening, really, is the Association for Learning Environments. We are part of the UK and Europe chapter. It's an international organisation with chapters right across the globe that have a focus on developing effective learning spaces to support our children and our pupils and students as they move through. And we're going to start this evening just with a short message from the chair of A4LE, a lady called Julie Williams.
Hello, A4LE family. This is Julie Williams. I am here to share some information with you about the activities within our association and also encourage you and provide some hope as to the future of A4LE. First and foremost, I want to thank our staff and our CEO for all of the work that they're doing behind the scenes. Many of you are in communication with them, particularly your chapter and regional leaders, and advancing our chapter and regional annual events. Many of them have been postponed till the fall. Some have actually been postponed till next year, but be rest assured we're keeping things moving. I want to thank all of our regional and chapter leaders as well, and all the volunteers that have invested so much time and effort into making these events happen. I know it's a disappointment for them not to come to realization in the manner that we have anticipated, but we as a family will get through this, and we will have even a more exciting and engaging experience. Don't know what the future holds, but we will all experience it together. I want to encourage you as facility planners that you are the most gifted and talented people around. That as facility planners, you have the opportunity to think in multiple dimensions and on multiple planes at any given time. You have to think with both sides of your brain and create the impossible. This is what you're gifted to do. And using this gift, you can reach out to your community and to your leaders within that community, your school sites, and your friends and family, and your community within A4LE, and share those gifts. Together, we will be able to solve each situation as it comes our way. Some of the examples that we see using our information platform, TASBO, if any of you are TASBO members, have been watching members share what they're doing in order to solve each crisis as it pops up. I'm encouraged to see the brilliance of the people in our industry and how we continue to use our smarts to overcome every hurdle that comes our way. The last part of the encouragement I'd like to share with you is, as an association, we are a global association, and we have at no other time in our history had the opportunity to reach out and touch someone in a seamless manner. We have the platform, the means, the methodology, and the resources to do it. We can broadcast into our schools, our home, our offices. We can share our work with one another, and this is the time to do it. I encourage you to use our members forum in order to be able to share what you're doing and how you're overcoming obstacles within your own school districts and within your own firms. We as an association will overcome this, and we will be brighter and stronger as a result. We have the opportunity to practice what we preach by using our global ingenuity and our opportunities to reach out and talk with someone and share our information like never before. Thank you so much for entrusting me to be your chair this year. I am here for you. Feel free anytime to reach out and share what you're doing. And again, I encourage you to use our members forum to start posting how you're overcoming these obstacles. Stay real, stay true, and keep A4LE alive. Thanks so much.
And a great message there from Julie, and I think it really highlights the importance of collaboration, and that's been our aim with this Edu Design Challenge. This deliberately is not a competition. We're not here this evening to announce any winners. We don't have any prizes, Dave. I don't know if you've got anything up your sleeve, but I certainly haven't got. I certainly haven't got any prizes. But what we're aiming to do is just to start a conversation about school design, and in particular, school design in the context of COVID. Now, when we wrote the challenge, we used the words post-COVID. We're actually kind of adjusting that to COVID aware this evening, because at this moment in time, we don't know when post-COVID will be. So we're thinking about that terminology. The organisation that was referenced, Association for Learning Environments, has its chapter in the UK and Europe, and I'm delighted this evening that we're joined by our lead in UK and Europe, Terry White. Good evening, Terry.
Good evening. Hi.
How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and glad to be with you.
And how's lockdown treating you?
It's bearable. Like Dave, I just need to find, apart from anything else, a good hairdresser at the moment. So I'm a bit wild when I get out on the street, but I can cope with that.
Just a message for anyone that's watching us live at this moment in time. You can post comments using the hashtag. Well, you can tweet us at A4LE UK, or you can use the hashtag EduDesign this evening. You can also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, put a comment in the comment box. And we can see those live here, and we'd love to engage with people that are watching live right now. We're going to go through, gentlemen, and share some of the examples that we've had in. Just to go through the design brief, our design brief for Challenge 1 was to design a multidisciplinary post-COVID learning space for 30 pupils aged 8 and 9. We deliberately kept it quite open, Dave. It's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the great things, linking back to what Julie was talking about earlier. People sharing their practice from across the globe. I've never experienced that in education like we have seen more recently. And I think by keeping things open, it recognises everybody's context different, but that we can all support each other in the development of new ideas.
Definitely, and that's such a great opportunity. I think that hopefully will come from this, so many new ideas that we can explore to have an impact on our learners. We're going to go through and have a look at some of the examples that have been shared, and we're going to look at these as the tweets as they came in. Before I do that, I just wanted to set the context in which I'm working at the moment, because currently I'm the head teacher, as I said, at the Prince of Wales School in Dorchester. We're a one-form entry first school, so we take children from 2 years, 9 months in our preschool, up to 9 in our year 4 class. And since the news came 2 weeks ago that we would be changing from a model where we're just offering provision for the children of key workers, which has been a very limited number of children, we've been offering childcare provision for around 13 to 20 children each day for the last 8 weeks since we moved to lockdown here in the UK. Since we've had the announcement that we're preparing to open on the 1st of June for more year groups, and for me that's about half my school will be coming back on the 1st of June, we've had to start looking at our building in a different way. So I put this tweet up yesterday, I think it was, talking about how we're dismantling our library. because this space will now be used as a second learning space alongside the existing provision that we have for our youngest children in our main school reception. So it's,
Gary,
go for it. Sorry.
Gary, do you think that might be something that's quite hard in terms of having to disinvest in things, because there's a lot of investment that goes into making the spaces in a school special? And I just wondered what your experience of that was in relation to this.
100%. So, one of the big things, soft furnishings, we've been advised by the government to remove soft furnishings. So this image that you can see on the right here, our library space, heavily influenced by IKEA furniture, as you can see. The items that have been added in there, there's, I think in that image, what's that, 5, 9, 14, there's 14 soft coverings that were made by our grandparents who supported the transformation of our school 18 months ago. And those are all being removed because that they can't exist in the space. And the space feels very different when they're removed. And it has an acoustic implication. It has obviously a comfort implication. And it has a change in approach, really, because we're not able to offer those little soft areas like we did before. So, it's a necessity because of the situation we're in, but it's something to be reflective on for sure. And I find that particularly the case in our early years environments where there's a whole host of things we've had to remove. I put up a post earlier on for our parents, and the initial response was, "Oh my, this looks awful." And we've done our best to create still the most inviting environment as possible. But there's something to be said that when something is so sterile, I'm one of these people that doesn't like and understands the research around very cluttered spaces, but you can also go really far the other way, can't you? And things can be too sterile. And I think there's a danger of that in the space. My building, we're dividing into spaces, and each one of the children will have a designated outdoor space. And I think we're going to talk a bit later on about the importance of outdoor. But when I was dividing up my site plan, having an importance on the outdoor space as much as the indoor space was one of the first considerations. Also looking at locations of hand sanitizer units and introducing a one-way system to our school, which is generally very open and people move through spaces all the time. It's not an open plan school, but it very much feels like that. We don't have any corridors in our school. Adults and children are used to being in each other's classrooms. It's very relaxed in that sense. And having to change those protocols, are really quite stark. And then introducing some visual cues and visual reminders. This is what I've been up to literally over the last 48 hours, producing our own vinyl graphics, trying to keep some humor in there, trying to keep it child friendly, some dancing men and dancing ladies sort of in part of our signage that's being spray painted onto the tarmac. And, this isn't to enforce social distancing. This is just to promote a positive message. We've been quite open with our parents that social distancing with very young children is impossible. And we will do all we can to educate the children over a period of time, but that's not instantly going to happen overnight. And we're certainly not going to introduce any negative connotations or not maintaining that social distancing. But the thing for me today, which really struck me, and I've done my over the weekend, I did my main letter to parents and my key communication about what it's going to look like. But at all stages through this, I've sought to also communicate to the children in a child-friendly, age-appropriate way. And I've been preparing a piece that I'll be putting together on Friday with 2 of my pupils coming in, and we're going to be doing some filming. And I've been trying to write the script for that, looking at it from the children's perspective. And that, for me, has been really powerful, to put myself in the shoes of the learner and to think about what's school going to look like for them and how's it going to feel for them. And from that, I started developing the language that we're using. And I put this out there today, but we're going to forget the terminology of bubbles and groupings, or you're in this zone. We're going to not use those words with the children because they're not age appropriate for the children that I work with. So we're going to go for the word kingdoms.
I love that. I think as a kid, I would have loved to have been, going into a kingdom. There's that sense of a quest, an excitement and an energy around that. And also going back to the visuals you were just sharing a minute ago, it reminded me of when I took my girls over to Berlin recently, and the traffic lights are different. They have this ample man, and it's a really, it's really distinctive, and children will really zone in on those things. And I love the way you've made those graphics fun, Gary. I think that It's a lovely model for others to be developing, and I must admit, not something I would have thought of, but having seen that, I know if I was still ahead, that would be something I'd be thinking, oh yeah, I could do that. I really like that.
I think there's no reason why we can't still make it fun, and make it engaging. And I think, the terminology, by using kingdoms and, keeping safe, children will not be able to visit other kingdoms. That kind of kidology is really important, especially working with younger children, but I think it can work with older children as well. And I think engaging, particularly with older children, engaging them in that discussion is going to be really important for schools to be successful as they move forward. So I just wanted to share my experience before we get sharing the design challenges. Obviously this was the brief, and we shared this through social media and encouraged responses. We did have one initial response that came in straight away, and this is from Tassie Thompson, and you can see the Twitter handle there, and their initial response straight away, this is almost instantly after the documentation went out, I think it was the same evening, they pointed us to the Harmony Outdoor Learning Area at the STEM Centre at Dumfries House. And they talk about the Nancy Owens Dynamic Learning Space Award, and they were the lead designer for the Play Equipment Company. And they shared where the copyright for this picture is with Ross Sinclair Photography. And just look at this image. Isn't that a wonderful image?
Yes.
Gorgeous.
And it kind of just highlights the importance of outdoor space in all this. We know the government guidance is really clear, that transmission rates are lower when people are outside, and for obvious reasons, airflow and things like that. And it really gets everyone thinking about outdoor provision. And I know that it's something that is a hot topic at the moment, Terry, the outdoors.
It is. And could I just make a quick comment? I think we all value the importance of outdoor space for young people to experience, being creative and being outside, and the value that brings, and the connection between the inside and the outside. But I think the thing that this picture strikes to me is that the outside is effectively a learning space, and has a whole range of stimulating activities and activity that can take place, not just going out, but actually being out and learning, if you see what I mean.
Definitely. And I think there's that, what I particularly like about this image is there's that almost clear connectivity between the really natural and the man-made natural, if that makes sense. Here you've got the shelter, you've got the obviously fantastic water spray here that's obviously been developed, but then look immediately to the right, you've got the actual forest which you can explore and bring into your learning, which I think is really, really powerful. And I think certainly something that perhaps we'll see in other projects as well. Certainly for me, it was a key consideration when thinking about what my school's going to look like, the outdoor provision. Really important. I think that can be a challenge for some schools. I know, Dave, the school that you've led previously, very challenged for outdoor space, for example.
Yeah, I mean, we had a very limited outdoor area. I mean, my first headship, we had a field, we had a very limited playground. So we had a large field, and the children had to bring in clothes to change into. They could climb the trees, things like that. My last school, it's city centre school, very limited outdoor space. I think the thing that was good about that was that it pushed us into utilising the rest of the environment nearby, whether it was local parks, whether it was the seafront in Plymouth, those things that are around you that you can walk to, that potentially in a city you have different access points to. One of the things I love about this picture as well is it blends the age old of a forest and trees and the new, and I think that's in all sorts of learning spaces at the moment, something that we're going to have to engage with.
Definitely. Thank you. We're going to move on and have a look at our next contribution. I'm going to click through on this. Our next contribution comes from Urban Scotland, who says, I asked my 8-year-old daughter what returning to school in COVID would look like, and she created this video. And this is from Neve. We're going to play this. It's going to take me a couple of seconds to just put this up correctly. So let's see if I can do this right. This is something that everyone should look forward to seeing, Dave, isn't it?
Oh, it's delightful. Absolutely brilliant.
Let's get this right, and then I'll play it to you all.
I love the way that she's really thought about it on so many different levels, and it's a lovely example of what you can achieve by involving young people, and yeah, it's absolutely fabulous.
Let's give it a. Oh, hang on a second. I don't know if I may have done that wrong. I'm just going to take it off because I want to make sure we get the audio right. Just bear with me 1 second because I'd hate to miss out the audio. Right.
Yeah, no, totally.
Let's give this a play.
My idea for COVID school. Imagine a school has 500 kids. A 100 kids could spend the day inside in the school with the teacher. That leaves 400 kids. So 150 could spend the day doing outdoor learning, the fields, the playground, and the forest. That leaves 250 kids. Now, kids normally have school trips once or twice a year, but 150 could go on trips every week to the local beach, big park, or the skate park, or football, or go out on boats and nice beaches. That leaves 100 kids. These kids can learn at home and have Zoom chats with the class. Every day of the week, people swap around. People talk about what they're going to do with the teacher, and then they are split into groups, and the groups talk together more about what they're going to do. The teacher goes among the groups in Zoom and to see how everyone is doing. Kids at home use BBC Bite Size. Kids outside can do reading in a tree. When it rains, the students can go into tents and learn. Kids on trips take their learning folder like math and literacy, and they would read in circles or read to each other. People on trips can explore the beaches. Kids on trips can make fires and roast marshmallows. That would be fun. They can also have kebabs for snack. In school, there should be a lift so people in wheelchairs can get in. People at school eat in the lunch hall, and people outside would have picnics and bring their own lunch. So that's my idea for a COVID school. 500 kids who can learn in different spaces.
Wasn't that just brilliant? I don't know about you, but I think we're just all smiling at that. It's just wonderful to hear directly from a learner about their thoughts on schools. Terry, I think that's the first time you've seen that. What did you think?
It is, and I think that the thing that strikes me is the rational way that a young person starts to work out what it is when there's a challenge in front of them, and how a young person at that age can start to respond to that in a very positive way, you know. And I think it just reinforces the fact that for many years, many of us have said that, you know, young people need to be really engaged in the challenges of learning and not just a tokenism about, you know, what they need to do in terms of very low level stuff. So I think that that's a really well thought through process, and I think she touches on some of the things external to the school in a very productive way. So I just think that's an outstanding piece of thinking, really.
It really is fabulous, and we've had so many positive comments about this contribution. Professor Stephen Heppel says, COVID school, 500 kids learning in different spaces. That's fab. Really well done. That's just wonderful. Amazing, Neve, some great ideas in this, and I love the way you set up your Lego figures to show your plans. And there's a response back there, and we've had some more comments as well. Sharon Wright says, this is fantastic. I love that Neve is thinking about the inside and the outside spaces and making them accessible for all children. This would be a wonderful school at any time. And Urban Scotland mum says, huge thanks. Interesting, isn't it? I was struck by Neve's matter-of-fact way of explaining her thinking. Learners know a huge amount where and how to learn, a massive resource for innovation. Completely agree with that comment. And sorry, I don't know if that's mum or dad, but just fabulous, just really fabulous. And yeah, just the importance of learners being involved, Dave. It's so important, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, the young people always generate such interesting ideas and different responses, and also the fact that they have that ownership and engagement in something makes the whole feeling and relationship to the space different. And I think one of the things that schools are going to need to work on as they transition is to think about how they engage young people, not just in the design of spaces or the understanding of spaces, but how they're going to prepare them to get into those spaces. What are people going to do before they arrive back at school? What modelling might need to occur? Young people are going to be understandably really excited. How are they going to greet each other? Rehearsing some of those things and having an understanding of what you're going into will really aid the needs of some young people and actually help everybody to be more successful when they go in.
I think it's Go on, Terry.
Sorry, Gary. I was just going to say that I think that in terms of the Association for Learning Environments, and we run, as with you and Dave through the year and many others, our Learning Spaces live events, going to school to talk to young people, to look at how they're dealing with these things. And I'm struck by one of the schools that we worked in London, where the head teacher would always say that, young people always surprise you, but only if you let them. And this issue about allowing young people to actually be engaged and to contribute, I think at a time like this, could be overmanaged by those running schools without actually using the young people as a resource to actually help support the process.
Yeah, and I think Neve explores this interesting concept about what's happening for the children that are not at school. And for many schools, they're facing that conundrum of, okay, we can only allow this number in, therefore we are moving to a part-time timetable and we're rotating. And obviously the government are discouraging that, but that's the reality for many, many schools, because they haven't got the space to support social distancing. And we're the same. If we have all of our children back, then we're limited, and we're quite generous on space in terms of our setting. But the question, the default response is then, okay, so some children won't be coming back in. We can't carry on doing what we were doing before with the online learning, because our teachers will be teaching the children in the room, and therefore they can't lead the online learning. And then we get this gap in time. And for me, it's not so much that the children are missing out on what they would be covered in school, because my view on that is they can catch up, but it's everything else they miss out on. It's that connection, it's that relationships, it's that development in terms of emotional well-being and the development of the whole child. And also it's what are we saying about learning? If we've done all this input over the last 9 weeks on online learning, and some great examples of content being led, and we're going to talk about technology a bit more in a minute, but if we then drop all that because we've got 20% of the school back in and we need to work directly with them, what does that say about what we've been doing over the last 8 to 9 weeks? Is there no value in that anymore? Are we prioritizing face-to-face contact over electronic means? And I think Neve goes some way in addressing that by exploring the question about what happens to the other children, what happens to the children that are not in the room. And that's, I think, just as important about when we design a space, especially post-COVID, whatever technology we're using.
I think as well, for parents, some of them are going to be going through a process of loss as well, of some of the things that they've experienced over the recent weeks. And obviously, it's as parents, as learners, there's going to be such a wide range of experiences. But for some of those young people, and for some parents, they will have had very rich quality of experiences that suddenly are going to be missing. And how that gets blended, how you take the good things from the current times and use those to plan forward. Again, it's a series of really interesting challenges for such a range of different needs of young people.
Really, really strong. And thank you so much, Neve, again. Really inspirational. We really appreciate your contribution. Thank you again. Our next contribution comes from Spaceform. And they share that this is a cost-effective solution for post-COVID, physical social distancing, separate desks, storage boxes, partitioning halls to provide extra classrooms and use of technology for learning. And this one I was interested in because this is a scenario that I might have to do if all children come back in. Which is the government's intention in the UK at the moment, that by that their guidance states that they want all primary children to come back for at least a month before the end of the academic year, which in reality means them coming back in the middle of June, 2 weeks after when the first children come back. And for me, that means that I'll have to convert a space such as my school hall, which is not the ideal learning space. It's a very high-pitched room that was designed to look like an open barn rather than be a functioning classroom space. And I've got the potential of having to accommodate 2 groups of 15 in there to meet the demand. Now, whether that happens or not is another matter, but that's why I was interested to see the thoughts here. And the reference here to the use of technology is interesting. And Terry, maybe just mention about the challenges of getting the acoustics right in a space like this, because that can be really hard. I see that they've added some acoustic paneling in here. Acoustics in a classroom environment are really important.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the issues that we face in developing more flexible spaces for learning over the last 10 to 15 years in the UK and the rest of the world is these open spaces that can offer so much more variety in learning, but actually do require some acoustic treatment in order that the sound levels are acceptable and that people can concentrate and can do a range of activity. Now, that's been a challenge in many open spaces, and lots of people have done work on that. But I think the difficulty here is if we're not careful, we may be able to get a level of instruction, and I would say instruction taking place, but the surrounding ambience and the quality of the environment in which that learning is going to take place without other means to soften the sounds may actually, may not help. It may hinder, and it may give a bad quality experience for the learner.
And isn't it really, that's the challenge that's facing me right now. And I think we touched upon it earlier on, and obviously it's referenced in this design, the importance of technology. And for me, technology has been instrumental in my response to, and very much at the center of my response to this crisis that we're in right now. We've launched our own virtual school, and I'm running daily broadcasts very similar to these. I've had to remember not to put my fancy dress costumes on this evening because that's what I'm normally doing. I know you're disappointed by that, Terry, but I thought I'd go from.
Oh, sorry, Gary. I thought you had. Sorry, I've missed that. Sorry.
But, I've been using technology to keep daily contact with my children, and we've been doing 3 live broadcasts a day, and the children have been sending me work in, and to me that's been central to my response. And I think moving forward, I've been thinking carefully about how will technology continue to play that equally important role. And I was on a video conference call with about 20 head teachers yesterday lunchtime, and we were talking about how we've been using the Google suite of application. It could be any other suite of applications that is not specific to Google, these thoughts, but it's how we maintain what we're doing with the challenge of having to open our school to more children and really keep that sense of personalization. Because I feel that's really important and a challenge sometimes with technology. I know, Dave, you've got experience of using learning platforms, and it's been a big focus of your schools in the past. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my most interesting experience was actually in the United States and working with schools in Detroit and Michigan, and having a blended approach where young people could come in for part of the school day or completely virtually. And for some families, that was incredibly important. This was a middle and high school age. It's really fascinating to look at how that platform could support learning, how people could reach out to different expertise. So the sense of team wasn't always the team that was in the room. It was much more widely held than that. So I think you're right to be raising those questions, and I think also to be thinking about what the functions of the technology are, what you're trying to achieve through that. One of the things that I've been sort of pondering on, and the last slide suggested more of an instructional approach to learning. In a room like that, you probably wouldn't have much discussion going on. You maybe want a different layout for that, and it may well be that technology gives more opportunities, like we're doing now, for discussion around learning. And actually, we're not in the same room. So thinking that through, what the functions are and what the responses are, both in terms of space and technology and the way they connect, I think is something that schools are not only going to have to think about now, but keep on working through and iterating through, and again, sharing each other's practice and experiences. People get great ideas from that.
Yeah,
I think, Gary, the other thing, if I could just comment, I think is that it's been outstanding in the way that many schools like yours and others have provided continuing education through online programs and activities and study programs for their students while they've been out of school. And I think that's highly commendable, and I think can be very creative. My reservation, I think, in all of this is that if we just, as we move through this, just replicate that as a new way of working, when in actual fact, learning from universities and from many schools in Australasia is that what young people and students are wanting is a higher level of engagement on the online experience, that suddenly somebody is working with them individually, and it brings back personalization. That it seems to me, if I'm on the end of that line, I want to give you some feedback. I want to talk to you. I want to actually have a conversation with you. And the motivational thing about making it personal is, I think, the next practice that we need to consider, if you see what I mean. In other words, we need to work out how we can spend time engaging and creating with that individual rather than just feeding them information.
Yeah,
100%. And I'm fascinated in the detail behind the announcement from the University of Cambridge that came yesterday about the fact that they've now announced that all lectures for next academic year, the whole next academic year, will be online. There will be no face-to-face lectures. And part of me thinks that's the headline. That's what's grabbed the attention of the press. But I'd love to understand and get, and I will look into this further, the detail beyond that. Because what I suspect it means is that their main method for delivering that knowledge will be online, and a lot of that probably already has been. But will the face-to-face, will the in-depth discussions, will the tutoring be more, because there's that opportunity to deliver content in that way? And I think that's quite fascinating, and kind of touches upon the point that you raised, Terry, about that connection can be delivered in so many different ways, and technology can support that.
I mean, on a lecture site, Gary, it's interesting how if you've got that as a film that's already been recorded, it's not like you typically stop the lecturer part way through, but you have that ability to stop and think about things, to rewind something, to replay it, and then it does place the emphasis on the quality of mentoring and of supervision and of seminars and the engagement that comes through those things. And again, those will be things from the individual level to the broadcast level that we're going to need to be considering.
I think the other thing, following on from Dave's point, is that it may mean in a different set of environments that actually the irony may be we need to put more resource into that tutoring and that support and that piece of guidance on that online experience than we currently think. It may just be expedient, deliver it like a module, go online, it's there, you complete it, you assess it, and whatever. When actually getting feedback, breakout groups, other groups that can come together around a particular theme that can be orchestrated by a tutor, may actually be a really powerful motivation for engagement.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving on to our next submission. If I can move the slides on. This comes from the team at LearnLife and Stephen Harris. And it says that in a world of constant changes, we should be able to adapt our learning environment, not only as a consequence on COVID, but rather focus on designing, inspire and healthy learning spaces that fosters growth and makes learning a pleasure. And what I like about this design is that this isn't a break from the norm from them. They've seen their response to COVID as the way that they're already moving. And if I don't know if anyone can explain Learn Life better than I can, but my understanding is that it's a hub in Barcelona that's exploring the future of learning and working very much in a mixed age, community-focused approach to addressing the challenges of what learning will look like as we move forward. And some of the references here, a personalised learning environment to support 21st century learning experience. The space, 100 metres squared, is a flowing mixture of campfires, large group spaces, watering holes, small group spaces, caves for solo working, and sand pits where hands-on creative maker spaces are encouraged. It's based upon an extended interpretation of David Thornbury's model of learning communities. Movable furniture, multimedia panels, seating arrangements, writable areas and open spaces should be available for everyone for active and experiential projects. And they've pulled out some elements of the design here. Flexibility, the space configure its layout for fluid group sizes for individual work to groups. Talking about inspiration, we must offer an environment that inspires new ideas. I love that element, and that's really important to me in how I think about learning spaces. Movement is supported by active learning styles. Color, textures, natural light, acoustic levels influence mood and productivity. Biophilia, nature is crucial to promoting well-being and creativity in learning spaces. And the tech devices enable learners to stay engaged. Dave, your thoughts on that space?
I think one of the things that I first really engaged with was not only how it could support learning, and not only is it a beautiful, space, it's invitational, you want to go into a place like that. I really love the way that it gave the sense of supporting emotional needs as well. So if you think about the emotional need for intimacy or privacy, you can see spaces where you could get that. If we go back to a more typical classroom layout, which is understandably how many of us will be thinking and responding, that maybe doesn't meet those needs so readily. So it's a really great provocation.
And there's another picture that goes with this. I'm going to move it through. And it says, in a world of introverts, extroverts, collaborators, lone wolves, dreamers and designers, we cannot cater to every type of learner using traditional teaching methods. An agile environment is required to support varied learning preferences to enable educators to accommodate unique student needs. The learning space must support collaborative social learning activities, hands-on experimentation and group discovery. In contrast to this quiet, independent reflective spaces should be quiet, independent reflective spaces should be available for solo learning. Just talk about that importance, Terry, between the need for collaborative spaces, but then the need for being able to break out into maybe smaller or solo spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that comes through from what has been illustrated there is very much about the gains that can be made by young people making choices as to where, when, and how to learn. And I think one of those things that we need to be thinking about is developing larger connected spaces that have within them the flexibility and adaptability in the center of the space to do a whole range of other things, but equally out leading from that space to either the outside, which I think is becoming more important, and perhaps the outside, especially in the UK, that could be new covered space, that actually also there are spaces to go into, to be quiet, to have intervention. And so I think we need to be thinking about much more suites of collaborative space that can be used, but can be changed to meet a developing need. And I think the acoustics as part of that, become very important. And if I could just, Gary, be a little bit controversial, I think for me, one of the things that's coming through all of this is that perhaps we need some urgent attention to ask ourselves the question, are we actually, in terms of our design and our space planning, especially in the UK, really giving enough space? And I don't think it needs a lot more space, but perhaps it needs a little more space to create that environment that we've just described. Because
the example shared there was 100 meters squared. How does that compare to traditional UK classroom, Terry?
Well, at the moment, UK Classroom, we would be saying that perhaps we would need to make that between 45 square meters, maybe 50 if you were lucky. And, it for me, the idea of 45 to 50 square meters and 25 to 30 young people, especially if they're 14 to 16-year-olds, being stuck in that space for an hour, then it really seems to me that is not a good, productive way of developing well-being or movement or activity or choice. And so maybe if anyone in the government's listening here, I would say, can they just think a little bit about a bit of additionality in the use of space in the design of schools to give us a little bit more adaptability? So when we do get these sorts of challenges, we can design with an ability to rework the space rather than having to think about creating more spaces, because that seems to me to be not an attractive way of going forward, if you see what I mean.
100%. And this is something that we've looked at before through A4LE events and throughout the year. In a normal year, when we're not in COVID, we have a number of events where we get together and we discuss these kind of issues. And the department have attended those events previously alongside a number of architects' practices and building contractors, and been able to kind of explore those. And what we're often doing is looking at where we can gain space from places like corridors or store areas, so that we can give them back to learning. And that's one thing I particularly love about my building. I don't have corridors, so my spaces are bigger because I don't have corridors that remove the need for circulation. In that way, we use outdoor space for circulation. So there are ways it can be done, Terry. But obviously,
no, I agree. Yeah. I think there are ways it can be done. I just think that there just needs to be maybe a little bit more, not a large amount, but a little bit more give to actually allow us to respond to these sorts of circumstances in a more creative way.
100%. And what I love about these, just to finish on this one about the pods here, there's a lovely sense of closed but open space about these. If you're in them, you can imagine that you've got that kind of, this is my space, I'm working here as a group or as an individual, the ones in the top right hand corner here. But if you're the teacher, if you're the adult leading learning in the space, you can see into them. And that's an important element, Dave, isn't it?
Yeah, I think on a number of levels, I think the most important one for me, I think particularly when you build that kind of environment of trust and seeing the way that you work with your young people, you were saying about their ability to move from space to space. I think that connection, it's less about surveillance, but it's really about that opportunity to connect, to feel together, even when I'm actually doing something really focused in a smaller space.
And there's so many learning gains that come from that collaboration and sharing of ideas. And thank you for that submission from Spain. Lovely to have an international example to share as well. So thanks for contributing. Really great to see your design. Next, we're going to go on to this design from James Clark, which is a combined response from Space Oasis and Learniture. And James says, we've been thinking about what a post-COVID classroom might look like as a result of the A4LE Edu Design Challenge, and this is what we've come up with. We know there'd still be challenges, so we'd love to have the dialogue. And if that's not setting myself up for a fall, bless him. Look, this has been great, and James sent me a PDF through this as well, so thank you, because I've been able to put this nice and big for us all to see and have a look at today. And he says, the post-corona classroom, a vision for the future. And as it says from Space Oasis and Learniture here. And we've got an overview here of a space. And obviously, this is a kind of example of a new build space or perhaps a conversion. And the first thing that strikes me, and it's something that we've talked about already this evening, is that connectivity with the outdoor space. And what James has built in here, and what the team at Space Oasis and Learniture have done is they've talked about a terrace, an external tiered space, external tiered space, both for recreation as well as a space to safely gather a large group of students for plenary sessions. And I love the idea of external tiered seating almost. I know, Terry, you've included tiered seating in many of your designs in the past, and tiered seating can have a real power, can't it?
It can, and I think that this allows what I was saying earlier. To achieve that, you just need maybe 5% more to do that. But I think equally what I like about this is you could easily see that you actually could part cover that external space So actually, it makes it usable for a long part of the year, which I think is always the problem with external spaces.
Yeah, and James has put that on the second point there about the courtyard. This would be level and covered outdoor space, accessible by wheelchair users and not weather dependent. And that's really important, isn't it, to be able to access that resource at any time.
Yeah.
One of my favourite lessons this year, before lockdown, was working with a group of year fours, and we were doing some observational digital artwork using some online watercolor tools. And we were taking some examples. I think we were using some Monet examples, and the children were recreating the pieces of work. And then I said, right, let's head on outdoors. And they were like, sir, it's raining, and you want me to take the Chromebook outside to do my art? And I said, well, we've got overhanging eaves that provide us not with a massive space, but kind of, I don't know, 6 to 8 feet directly outside of our classrooms that is covered. And the children went out there, they put the coats on, and we had the Chromebooks open. The rest of the school thought I was mad just watching me, but the work that the pupils produced, and it was just in that simple covered space, and was really powerful, actually. It just shows that, being outside but also being protected can be really powerful. The classroom here is a 60 meters squared teaching space, accommodating 16 students for direct instruction. I think there's that acknowledgement that whatever model we're looking at, direct instruction has its place, and this always tickles me, I suppose is the right word, Terry. But when I remember when we did some work with High Tech High in California, and High Tech High is probably a world leader for project-based learning, and we had some input. I can't remember the gentleman's name now. He came over, didn't he? And he did some input with us. But there was this instant assumption that the children in this really futuristic model would just spend the whole time, I don't know, building projects, and that direct instruction had no place. But actually, in all educational models, direct instruction has a key strand in terms of that parting of knowledge, and that, like we said earlier, that can be done in electronic ways as well. It doesn't have to be a teacher, presenting. It can be done in all sorts of different ways. But in any kind of future education model or current education model, direct instruction has its place, and it's important to remember that. I think but it's about a balance, and it's about not tipping things too far in one way. And for me, the good models have that holistic, broad approach where direct instruction is just part of many tools that we have in a toolbox to support children to be inspired to learn. And it's good to see that reference in this design as well. This space also includes a breakout space for students to carry out independent learning or working collaboratively with others. And Terry, I like the connectivity between the spaces. The glass is clearly really important in that design.
I mean, I think you've got the detail there in front of you. I think it's a great design that James has got there. That 60 square meters, is that the central space and the breakout?
Yes. No, I think it's just the central space.
Yeah, so that's my point. You see that this question about the idea of 60 square meters is probably enough to do some reconfiguring of a learning environment to actually create instruction, group work, activity, a little bit of focus in the space. To bring the breakout in the way that we've got it, which I think is important, and to bring the outside in, which is a bonus. I just think I'm just peddling the point that we need to make better use of space, but I think we could just do with a little bit more.
And Gary, if you go back to the slide before, I think there's some really interesting things around how you might transition from space to space as well. I think that by having more than one entrance, into the breakout space, you potentially got a way in and a way out. It also made me think about how whereas you were going out into the outdoor areas, having a small covered area just outside with changing, with wellies and coats and things like that, because it's often little things in a design that can then make those transitions into spaces work really well. Whenever space is really tight, it comes back to what Terry's saying, just a little bit of extra space, a little bit of extra functionality comes from that in terms of the kind of storage and flow of space and interconnection.
Well, I think it's a really valid point. And James puts here, we cannot see any solution to the creation of a teaching and learning space that allows students to socially distance to any extent without the use of outdoor space. And that kind of replicates what we've been saying this evening. Furthermore, the use of nature is known to promote calmness. Stress is the enemy of attention and learning, but also health. Stress is the single biggest factor in almost all diseases, and it increases the production of cortisol, which reduces the immune system. Outdoor space can use simple furniture products such as our zigzag and enable this space to be used for individual learning supervised by the teacher in an adjacent classroom. And I love those zigzag desks. They're very cool. Sit on there and you've got an instant space to work at. On the classroom, the 60 square metre classroom, only marginally larger than most are currently constructed to accommodate 16 students arranged in 2 banks of 8 facing the middle of the classroom. For this reason, 2 display screens are positioned at a high level. A narrow space with just 2 students side by side and perimeter walkways allow the teacher to circulate the classroom and support every learner individually. Being located centrally to the 3 zones and the natural instruction position being in the middle of this space allows the teacher to supervise all students, both those outdoors as well as those in the adjacent breakout zone. And I think that's an interesting point for me about how many designs that I've seen circulating the internet, or how people have set up their socially distanced rooms, they haven't thought about circulation and how, if a child needs to get up and go to the toilet or collect something, or the teacher needs to move around and help a child, how almost that their model goes completely out the window. And I think that's an important consideration when you're thinking about your spaces.
Definitely, Gary, and also the way that people come into the school. If you've got anybody who, so for example, you can imagine for some young people on the autistic spectrum, after a long period of time of being at home, suddenly coming back in could be a really difficult transition. So what kind of spaces enable someone to come back in gradually or in a very safe kind of manner? There's going to be young people who have got an increased level of trauma based on their experiences over the last few months for a variety of reasons, and how we create spaces to manage those needs as well will be as significant as just looking at the classroom itself.
James talks about the breakout here, saying using specially designed round tables to ensure learners keep at least 1.5 meters apart from each other. Note the World Health Organization recommended a physical distance of at least 1 meter between people, and countries who have been the most successful in reducing the increase of COVID in their countries have socially distanced at 1.5 meters compared to the UK's 2 meters. These spaces are protected from adjacent walkways by dividers that integrate resource storage accessible from walkways as well as planting. So some good detail there. I'm just going to click on to the next slide. We get another view of the glazing, positioning the teacher largely in the center of the learning space, and with the use of fully glazed walls both internally as well as externally enables a single teacher to still supervise 30 plus students, half being instructed formally and the other half carrying out independent or collaborative study in the adjacent area. For the same reason, both adjacent areas are raised to maintain clear sightlines. I think he makes a really interesting point here, because that's a reality that I'm facing in terms of if I've got to split my children into smaller groups, it's the availability of adults. And already in our UK system, we're challenged in terms of funding, and availability of adults has already been quite thin on the ground. But add to that, a global pandemic and people, adults being affected more so than children, and also the need for certain adults to super shield or shield, or the maybe in more vulnerable groups. There becomes a staffing challenge with COVID as well, and I think James has done some way of addressing that and thinking about that. And I think that's an important consideration for all settings at the moment. It's about how to organise their adult resource. Terry, we touched on quite a bit there about circulation. Circulation is really important in any design, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think that's the point at the moment that I think we need to think carefully about, because if you're keeping that distance, and that's going to be a given in terms of the way we move through this process, then, as you said earlier, somebody coming out of a session to go to a toilet, somebody that's in distress, somebody that needs an intervention, the way they move through the space and where they can move through the space to keep that distance is actually going to be, I think, quite an important thing to consider. Yeah.
In the picture here, it says, whilst a degree of discipline and order will be required, we've made it easy for students to safely circulate around the learning space by having numerous ways in and out of the space. Only those to the outside spaces, only those to the outside spaces have doors for security. It is envisaged that these will be kept open as much as possible to encourage the free movement of air. And those environmental factors are important as well in the design. Thinking too about the other elements, strong Wi-Fi element, really important. Projection, rear projection to the glass enables teacher to share presentations with large groups using outside terrace. Equality, level thresholds enable wheelchair-bound students to access the outdoor space from the classroom, as well as via a ramp to the right from the collaborative space. And that was one of our design requirements, to think about how the spaces can be made accessible. And a number of the designs this evening have included that. And thank you for including that elements in. And it's an important part of any design process, in terms of new build. And obviously there's certain regulations around that, but it's always good to go the extra mile on those things. James has also included some fantastic additional things here. I'm just going to pull out a couple of those. The importance of hygiene, not just about washing hands, about thinking about about how easy what surfaces are to wipe and what should happen if, in the case of a breakout of COVID. And I think that's what we have to think about. Worst case scenarios, how will we make sure spaces are clean? He picks up an interesting point here that I'm just going to hand over to Dave. Really, he talks about a willingness to change. We know that most teachers do not reflect this caricature, but similarity, many still predominantly use direct instruction, didactic pedagogy. Without twice as many teachers and twice as much space, this will not be possible, at least in the short term. It will be necessary for school to be a combination of taught and self-directed learning. We need teachers to approach this positively and optimistically in order for it to work. That's a really valid point, though.
Totally, and I think what most teachers will see as well is the need to change, and there's a great evidence base over the last 2 months that people have been doing that and finding new ways of working. I guess one of the real challenges for school leaders and for school teachers as a group is, how is that scaffolded? How do you support that change? Because we all tend to like the idea that change will be helpful, but when we've got to change ourselves, that's maybe a little less comfortable. And with the level of uncertainty and pressures around on people more generally at the moment, the way that teachers are being reported about really unfairly in the press, I think those are things that we've really got to think through, how we support the well-being of our staff and the scaffold to support them to develop a new way of working.
And James includes a great quote there from the Financial Times, and I'll post that out later on because it's a really good reference point. We had a reply to James's tweet that said, "Not too unlike my own school back in the day," says Donna. "Lots of outdoor space and natural light and ventilation. It was in colour when I was there." I was going to ask Terry for a comment on this tweet.
Thanks, Gary. No, I'll pass on that.
But Terry, in all seriousness, school design has changed over a period of time, and there are some lessons that we can learn from the past.
No, I think I think that's right. I think one of the key things, though, is it's the valuing of the outside experience as a learning and well-being experience, and I think that's where that needs to come back much more into center stage. Because in my work in designing schools, the external becomes like an afterthought for play and recreation, as opposed to a space that can add value to the enhancing of the learning experience in a whole variety of ways. So it's almost like a plan B player in the whole design scheme, rather than being an equal player. And I think that's why we have to change the agenda.
Yeah, totally agree. There's a need to rethink, isn't there, and be brave as we move forward with convictions in design. And I think that many of the designs kind of touch upon that this evening. The next design that we've got through is from O'Donnell Brown, and they asked the question: "Is 2020 the summer of the outdoor classroom?" looking to outdoor learning can help us understand how we might educate children safely in the post-COVID world. And pictured here is the community classroom, which is a modular outdoor classroom. This can help schools deliver progressive outdoor learning experiences at a safe social distance. And they ask the question, what if we change the way we view learning spaces? Modular design, Terry, another key word in school design at the moment. Do you want to touch upon that?
I think just very briefly to say, I think that one of the things that modular design, I think, or let's say the concept of designing off-site and bringing onto site to meet a client need or to meet a new challenge, I think has tremendous scope. And I think it's actually, it could very quickly help us in terms of making much more efficient and effective use of the outside space. I think that all three of us, though, share the idea that if we're going to do that, then we need to actually let the learning lead that design. And I think at the moment, there may be a lot of ways that people are thinking about modular, but one of the ways I think would be really important is to say, how can modular design enhance the external learning experience in a way that's cost effective, meets the client's needs, is bespoke to the school depending on its climate and its context. And I think if we were looking at that off-site production and taking to the site and actually setting it up, I think would have a really powerful impact on what we need to do over the next year. And I think the designs that you're showing here are a very good example of that.
I think this is where we get into the economics of all this, because certainly for the age of children that I'm working with, I believe it's very clear why the youngest children are coming back. I see it as an economic decision, political economic decision, because it's a childcare issue. Workers are struggling to get back to work because they haven't got the childcare. And they can't use grandparent school because of the nature of the virus. So it's presented that unique challenge. And that's why, I believe we've been directed to bring our early years. So we've got all of our preschool children, our reception and year one learners coming back in the very youngest of the school. And being a first school, one can only expect that if that's the methodology, that will grow to my whole school. And if we're in a position where we have a second spike in the autumn, for example, as I said earlier, I've got a real challenge around space, and I've already started to look at, how can I bring additional space on site? And obviously I've gone to those kind of traditional porter cabin kind of providers and looked at what's available there. Obviously, those kind of things are designed to perform a specific task in a specific time, and I get that. But I think there's opportunity for innovation there as well in terms of what can be offered. And I suppose the point I'm getting to is at some point there's going to need to be a decision about, are we going to rethink how learning works in terms of adopting a model like Neve did in her video, or are we going to put the money behind increasing the physical space to enable, and not only the physical space, but the human resource, and arguably, which one has more value, which one's more expensive, which one's better in terms of an economic benefit. And I'm not looking at this now from a learning point of view, though we should, but from an economic point of view, there's an interesting argument, I think, both ways.
I mean, I think, can I just comment? I think there are two things that picking up there, Gary, from Association for Learning Environments point of view, both in the UK, Europe and internationally. I think the first thing is that the design of the spaces, I mean, James has indicated an interesting one there, using screens and glazing in order to actually make connection and to stay in touch with young people and for staff to stay in touch with young people. I think there has to be a hybrid here. I think the first is that we have to think creatively about moving out of little boxes and creating spaces that can be more adaptable when we hit the sort of challenge that we've faced in the last 6 months. You're never going to deal with that challenge by simply saying, I need another 12 classrooms because I've only got 6 and I can only put 15 people in them. So I need another, that isn't a productive way. I think the way is thinking about, how do I design a space? You mentioned it earlier, that can actually have areas in it that respond to learning needs, but can be adapted differently and have enough space in them to be more flexible and adaptable if we meet other sorts of challenges. So I think there's a rethinking about how we organize connected spaces. But I think the bit that then sits next to that is how can we very quickly colonize the external spaces, not just for independent, free, creative play for young people, but how can we colonize the outside spaces with either overhangs that we do in primary traditionally, marquees, tents, extended roof areas, so that we actually, if we do meet this situation, we can actually let young people go out and create more space to work in. And I was very impressed in talking to some colleagues through A4LE in Denmark, of course, where they're starting to use marquees and tents to set them up outside, connected to the external areas of their schools very quickly to create that additional space.
Any marquee companies watching that are working, I've already tried to contact you. That's an option that I've been looking at, and I've not had great joy from them. They've all furloughed and not willing to talk to me. So anyone watching that knows some good marquee contacts, that's something that I've been looking at for sure. We did have a tweet reply to this. Katrina Brown said, "Would be lovely to see a flurry of these across schools. Such a lovely thing," and I totally agree with that. Love the design of that space, so thank you for sharing it. Our next, and this is our final submission this evening. This was a late entry, but we've let it through. And this is from the team at Grapnels, who very kindly promoted what we were doing as well back on the 6th of May. And this is thinking about a whole host of different things. This is quite a large document, and we're not going to have this time this evening to go through in depth. But I have every confidence that the team at Grapnels will post this up at some point for you all to see. And as soon as they do, we'll obviously promote that across our A4LE network. But this is a response, and we've pulled out a couple of pages each that we were particularly interested in here, and they were thinking here about, and I love the term, together developing positive solutions, which is exactly what we're seeking to do this evening by having this conversation, working together, looking at all designs to develop those positive solutions. We've got some information about the pandemic there and the disruption that it's had. And Dave, you particularly pulled out this page.
Yeah, because I mean, I love the concept of that, the links with Reggio, the way that the environment is that third teacher, and how we create that and maximize that at these times is a new challenge. And I think, as we've seen tonight, people will find really, really clever ways of working through that. So I think it's just really useful as a concept for people to recognize the power of your environment. We don't always recognize it. Teachers often, they'll go into the room and however it's set up will be how it will be. The great teachers really maximize the space. They really consider its impact, and they connect it back to learning, as we've been saying.
100%. I'm very excited because we've had our first live comment, which comes in from James, who's watching. Thank you, James. You're our first official comment. And James says, temporarily, Gary, rent a marquee from a company that hasn't used them for festivals, etc. this summer. I will keep exploring, James. Thank you very much for your first live comment. You'll need to get definitely some prize, not only for your brilliant design, James, but for being the first to live comment. So that got me very excited, so thank you. Not as much as your design, obviously, but let's move on to other pages in this document for Grapnels. The next one talks about that balanced solution and looking at how we can work together. And I think that concept of working together is something that's essential. We've got together educators, students, suppliers, designers, and architects. Terry, that's what A4LE is all about, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's very much about people coming together to collaborate on bringing their professional skills as designers, educators, design professionals, those people that are looking at administration in schools, to actually try to come together to collectively create solutions. And we know from some of the activities that you mentioned earlier, Gary, our Westminster workshops, where we've brought people together on design challenges, just as this is starting to develop here, that actually that professional expertise is there. I think what we're not doing at the moment is bringing it together and using it to forge really creative new solutions. And I think we need to do that, because I think that will stop us perhaps going backwards. One of my concerns at the moment is that we need to meet the challenge and move forward. There could be a tendency to simply go backwards on the basis of singular, isolated young people being remote and not collaborating, and therefore not valuing the culture of their school, the well-being in their school. And I think we've got to find a positive challenge forward. And so I think this, you need a range of design professionals around this to make that work.
This document touches on a number of the things that we've mentioned this evening in terms of flipped classroom, use of technology, thinking about other spaces in your building that can be repurposed to increase the theoretical capacity of your building. And that's going to be something that schools have to address. And I mentioned at the start of this evening that I've had to repurpose my library. I may have to repurpose my school hall, sports or dining hall that I use. And people initially, particularly in this first phase, may have to think creatively. Thinking about signage, not something we've mentioned massively this evening. I mentioned that I've introducing some signage, but signage is important in schools anyway. I don't know about you, Dave. I know you've been involved in a new design project before. Signage was important when you were thinking about your new build.
Yeah, we deliberately tried to look at signage that inspired us from different areas. So some of the best examples we saw were actually in museums. And I think, again, looking for source of inspiration outside of the school sector might be a useful tack for people in these times, because there isn't a handbook for how to do this. This is stuff that we're having to invent and iterate through.
I think, just following on from that point, for both of you, I think the other thing is that in the particular circumstances in which we find ourselves, we need to be much better about the positive messages that we put out through signage in terms of what we're trying to create, and the and the culture that we're trying to create, and the new norms we're trying to create. And I think vision panels and ways of communicating that, and I realize there's always an argument about clutter and display and the balance between how much and how little you have, but I do think positive messages around why we're trying to do this and the value of it in terms of hygiene, all those things could be done much better within the school system.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And I like this slide about the little ideas, and it makes me think about the little details. Little details still matter. We can often get focused on really big elements about where children will be, but sometimes just stepping back and thinking about just the little things, because the little things can make the differences. We know that in all cases, it's about a combination of elements that make a space. It's not just about the size or the shape or the materials or the FF&E that's used. It's the blend of all those things, and that's important when we're designing any space. And there's some thinking around that, and thinking about how we can look at different models and different agilities. There's some thoughts here about independent working and groupings in different ways. Thinking about how information can guide movements, and thinking about that signage and the use of boards. Thinking about how things can be flexible. And I like this comment here: anything that is fixed to the building will be obsolete sooner than something that's mobile. And that's certainly a principle that I've sought to adopt in my own school, about the importance of things being able to move. When I arrived at the school, there was a lot of fixed storage units that were really limiting a teacher's ability to reconfigure a space. And when you've got an interactive screen that's screwed to the wall and a defined carpet area, and then a large storage bank that the TA uses for resources, you then become very limited to what you can do with your classroom. And the ability to be able to move absolutely everything is really important. And I really like the idea of these kind of mobile power units that mean that you can reconfigure, and the classroom then can be anywhere. Could be outside, could be in the hall, could be even in an open corridor. Maybe you've got a large atrium styled grand entrance. Maybe that's the best place to turn into a classroom. There really is lots of opportunities, and again, we talk here about the importance of getting outdoors, and it's something that we've referenced a lot this evening. Thinking if our classroom's anywhere and we've got to divide large spaces up, the importance of acoustic paneling, which we touched on earlier upon this evening. I really like this. I really like this slide, Dave.
Yeah, I did too. I think the idea of repurposing is a really helpful thing to approach, and it's also something that I just wonder. I was really curious when I saw it. It made me think, I wonder what kids would come up with, which different ways they would start to approach this, and what solutions they would think of. I'm sure they would think of some things that I never would entertain without their help. And I really like the mobility side of this and the repurposing.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Volkswagen Funology videos and where they convert the staircase using the piano keys, and it's a video I often use when speaking. And it kind of gets me thinking about, how to encourage children to wash their hands. Could we produce something that's a bit more interactive? Because that especially with the really young learners, it makes a noise when you go near it or something, or I don't know, there's some sort of reward system. I think there's great fun that can be had. But yeah, I too like the repurposing here. You can see how the item on the left could be a teacher's pedestal, or it could be repurposed as a hygiene station on wheels that can be moved around. And I particularly like that idea as well. And it's good to see. There's some thinking here about classrooms in the sports hall, the use of mobile furniture, enabling people to spread out and to reconfigure accordingly. Thinking about inclusivity and integration of that as well. Thinking about how we ensure that we don't forget to make changes that enhance integration and inclusion. Simple tools, making sure things are lightweight so that everybody can access them. Things like height adjustable displays are really important. And also, this was touched upon, I think, in James's presentation as well. But there are specific products out there that are designed to be anti-microbial finishes, and obviously, Grapnel's have got extensive information about that and their extensive experience. I'm told this picture was taken in the classroom this morning in Cambridge. So this is an example of a space that's been set up. I think we can see the separate stationery there, the separate items, the place to store, and think about the importance of the environment in that time. And I think it kind of brings us full circle, this last picture, really, about the importance of the child in all this. It's really important to put the child at the focus of all that we're doing. And we had that wonderful example of Neve, and Dave just touched upon it there. If we ask children what they think, it's really interesting to sort of see the answers we get, Dave.
Yeah, definitely.
So that kind of completes all of our submissions. Thank you so much. It's been a really wonderful evening, kind of exploring those. We really do appreciate the time that people have taken to put their ideas together. I'm personally blown away by the response. When I first spoke to Dave about this, I never dreamt that we'd be getting the kind of level of detail in response that we've had, and also that the range of responses that we've had have been wonderful, haven't they, Dave?
Absolutely, really inspiring, and it's a beautiful illustration of the education system at its best, and people from all different areas, all different ages, coming together to find new solutions.
Now, everything that we've done this evening has been broadcast through multiple platforms, through Periscope, through YouTube, through Facebook. A recording of this will go straight live onto our A4LE YouTube channel and our A4LE Facebook page and our A4LE Twitter feed. So if you want to watch it back at any point, it'll be there. You can point people in the direction of it. This evening, I'll make sure that I go through and tag everyone that's been mentioned this evening, so that they get a notification and a thanks, really, for contributing. We'd love to do this again, and we're going to set this evening our second design challenge. Before we do that, Dave, we've got this transformation journey graphic. Do you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, I think it's I've been very lucky to be working with some super people in the last few weeks, and David Samuels, who's the head teacher at Mayflower Academy in Plymouth, was talking to me about some of the things that were happening in his school community that he was really excited about being able to hold on to. And as a school, they had some great things that were going on before COVID as well. And it made me start to think about, well, how do you blend that current experience and the prior experience and transition into something new? I think that one of the risks could be that there's just a reaction to the COVID experience that maybe doesn't focus on the learning needs that we know our young people are going to require in a rapidly changing world. The ability to navigate, to deal with uncertainty, all the soft skills, the ability to collaborate, work with technology, all the things that we're seeing and experiencing ourselves as really significant needs as adults. We need to be preparing young people for that. So I think it's a really interesting way of looking at how do we journey towards those new norms, and also recognise that at this point in time, just before we're going into that transitioning phase, from out of lockdown and into that transitioning phase, the curve's at its steepest there. And I think it's really important that people work collaboratively together. It's what tonight was about. It's what A4LE is all about. And I know the three of us will really look forward to working with everyone around finding new ways and new norms.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting phase that we're moving into. I think, yeah, without doubt, it needs that collaboration to be successful. This is not something that people can do in silo. And Terry, I don't know if you want to put any comments to add to what Dave said.
No, all I would just say, I think is that the reflection, if we look at the contributions this evening, they've come from a range of design professionals, or everybody looking at how we might come together to try and make this a positive move forward. But, build the best of the past, sustain the future, but develop new ways of working that actually are going to be very positive for young people. And I think the thing for me, I would keep hammering this business that we need to ensure that whatever we do, we keep making learning personal for young people, and that we ensure a sense of well-being for staff and students in schools as we work our way through this.
Yeah, 100%. A really, really valid point to finish us off on there. Our next design challenge, Open Design Challenge 2. Open International Design Challenge 0. It's late in the evening, gentlemen. 002. Design a specialist STEAM COVID-aware lab. Talk to us about STEAM labs, Terry.
I think the thing here for me is to look at, say, for example, if we're going to get young people to be active inquiry, and how we're going to make young people keep a distance, let's say, and inquire and develop and follow their passions and their pursuits around learning, then how we structure something that creates itself in one space, because, we're talking about a space, how that's going to look and what that's going to do, I think needs some careful thinking through. And it may be that is one space, it may be it's a cantilever space, it may be it has 2 levels, it might have screens to connect to something else. But I think we need to set this challenge in the context of the challenge you've set this evening. In other words, we're looking at this in a new context, not in an old context. And I think that's where the innovation, I hope, will come through.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, hopefully this evening's given you a taste of what these sessions are all about. It's not a competition. We're not here to declare any winners. It's open to absolutely everyone, and we would love to see more children entering this as well. So if you're a design professional watching this, we want you to contribute, but encourage your children, their friends, link into schools that you might be working with. We really are open to all here, because it's about that conversation. It's about sharing those ideas and developing that practice as has been discussed. We've introduced some special requirements, Dave. We want to see some. We want to see 2 examples of equipment that we've named, and then we've also created a kind of open invitation, really.
One thing that I'd really encourage people to do in relation to this is to think about the actual roles of being a scientist, being a designer, being an artist, an engineer, and think about the kind of spaces that they might work in, because it's not always the design process. Sometimes the design process is best done in a cafe and or down a pub. But that opportunity for thinking through what the requirements of those spaces are, those roles, I think is an interesting way of approaching this and preparing people, young people, for the real world.
For everyone who's watching, thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure to be live this evening across the different platforms. Again, to everyone who's contributed, a massive thank you, because we couldn't have done this evening without your amazing designs. And again, we're blown away. We really appreciate you sharing. Thank you, Terry, for joining us.
Thank you indeed for inviting me.
And Dave, always good to see you, and we're looking forward to seeing you again for the next challenge. We'll invite some more special guests next time as well, and hopefully this is something that will grow in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Good evening. Take care.
Goodbye.